Today, I'd like to speak with you about a very interesting topic, and this is what I'm referring to as the fallacy of the all-in-one romantic relationship or romantic partnership. It's a very interesting question. In fact, I was wondering just recently about the following. Why is it that there are so many dating apps out there today? I imagine you can come up with a number of different explanations, ranging from changes in technology and culture. I would like to offer my own, and it goes something like this. To begin with, since the Renaissance, or some would say since the Enlightenment period, it's been said that there has been the birth of the modern individual as the basic entity of life, as a agent on whose behalf he or she is said to be living or living out a life. It doesn't really matter when we start the historical clock for my purposes here, whether it was during the Renaissance or in the aftermath of the Renaissance or with the Protestant Reformation in the early 1500s or after the Enlightenment period or after the French Revolution. Uh, it seems to me that it's a social fact. We are not communitarians, especially in the United States. And our educational establishment is set up in such a way that it is meant to produce modern, self-possessed, largely self-reliant, autonomous individuals, capable of functioning in a modern economy, to be sure. In fact, in the notes below, I'll include a very short piece I wrote for Eon some years ago about the nature of total work. I think we have to just accept that the family, and I'll touch on that in a moment, and what I'm calling here our educational establishment or educational system is cultivating or civilizing us in such a way that we become self-standing individuals, capable of acting appropriately, functioning in a modern economy, and living out our lives. So that's the first point I want to make. Now I come to the second. There was, in 2020, a really wonderful article by David Brooks in The Atlantic, and he was looking at the transformation of the family from the late 19th century, if I recall correctly, and into the early 21st century. He suggested there were three phases that the family has gone through. The first, as you might imagine, is that it was an intergenerational structure. The second, and this is the point I want to bring out here, is that from 1945 to 1980, he posits what we call the nuclear family, this family in accordance with what is otherwise termed the European marriage pattern, comes to its fruition. And note that 1980 or thereabouts is the date when it begins to unravel. I'll come back to that in a second. And in the third phase, he thinks that there could be something called a forged family, which looks somewhat communitarian in nature, actually. A kind of experiment in which people are living communally in various and sundry ways. So that's meant by his lights to overcome this problem of isolation and loneliness. And it's meant to effectuate a desire to belong to something that is larger than the individual himself or herself. It's the second phase that's really interesting, I think. That is, I don't know how old you are, but you can start to see over the course of your lifetime, perhaps, maybe you're younger, maybe you're older, that the nuclear family, or some variant thereof, the single household, has been unraveling. You might think of the sorts of, loosely speaking, holidays or rituals that you were a part of when you were a child. And you might look some 10, 20, 30 years later and see that those aren't actually there. This is not just, I don't think, a post-COVID pandemic attenuation of familial bonds. I would say that COVID has simply accelerated this devolution, this pulling apart this slow unraveling of the family as a fundamental and meaningful unit uh, in which the individual can find himself and to which he can return and upon which he or she can rely. So that's the family, I think, is that particular family structure, I mean, or some variant thereof, really is coming apart at the seams slowly, and then I think quite quickly. I think there's a third development that I'd like to bring to your attention here, and that is what some sociologists and those in the popular media today are referring to as the friendship recession. According to one poll I read just the other day, I think it was on PBS, or was reported in PPS, some 20% of males polled, American males polled, said that they had no friends whatsoever. I'm going to touch on friendship or the friendship recession in another video, but for now, I simply want to ask you to look at your own life. So you might say, yes, I have friends, but how many of those, as Aristotle would say, are simply friendships of pleasure, event friends, common interest friends, and so forth? Are those robust and close friendships? And how many friends are simply friendships of utility, as Aristotle also called a second set of so-called friendships? If you weren't to work at this company or you weren't to be involved in this particular industry, if you cease to have any kind of um, social or cultural capital or professional capital, if you will, would that relationship be maintained? So I think that study in the so-called friendship recession is pointing to another unraveling, which goes beyond the bounds of friendship. I think we're seeing civil society, one in which there used to be clubs and various ways of associating that are in many quarters no longer there. Rites of passage, some have pointed out, are simply not functioning or are not there for many people. The larger point being that we're not actually, collectively speaking, and I understand there are outliers, finding deep, lasting, and close friendships. And we're not having other kinds of social bonds that are holding us together as well. I trust you see where I'm going with this. When I speak of the fallacy, then, of the all-in-one romantic relationship, what I'm referring to is the fact that all of our bonding power, all that we're looking for in life, or most of it, is starting to get packed into one relationship. I'm an individual. My family is not there for me anymore, not in the way that I had hoped. I don't have any other friends. Work, as a number of leftists have said, and you can experience this yourself, the workplace can be alienating. The late David Graeber called many jobs bullshit jobs. So I'm not finding it there, though some argue that work is like a family, erroneously so. So it's the romantic partnership or the romantic relationship that comes to take on everything that used to be spread out through these other forms and other ways of belonging and bonding and so forth. In fact, Esther Perel, who's a therapist, had a piece some years ago that did very well as a TEDx talk, or TED talk rather. And she was arguing that there are two commitments or two aspirations that many modern people have with regard to a romantic relationship. Uh, One, they want the best friend. Notice what she said, the best friend. Where did our best friends go? And the other is that they want the mysterious lover. They they want there to be the erotic dalliance. Uh, that's a lot to ask. That is, we're putting together the best friend, the one who's going to be there for me through thick and thin, with the erotic and sexual and mysterious intimacy. I would argue that that itself is indicative. What she's describing, I don't think what she's saying is wrong, is actually where all the rivers meet. And so I want to end with just a brief remark about the spiritual significance of this moment. Since this is a video ostensibly concerned not just with the history of ideas and with the development of modernity, though it is with that, it's also concerned with what that significance is for us. What is the existential import of all of this? And my basic suggestion is that we have a mistaken soteriology here. A soteriology is a doctrine of salvation or a doctrine of liberation or freedom. All of us, whether we know it or not, want to be truly free and truly happy. Fair enough. I'm not denying that particular aspiration. However, there is a fundamental question here. Is it possible for that kind of romantic relationship to be fundamentally freeing, that which is sufficient for abiding happiness or lasting peace? You'll have to come to the answer yourself, but by my lights, the answer is no. That's too much to ask of a particular partnership. It makes the stakes way too high, and it involves putting, so to speak, all of our eggs in one basket. That's why I'm calling it an all-in-one conception. Can any kind of person or can any relationship actually bear all that existential weight? Look for yourself, experience it for yourself, and see what you discover. So thanks for being with me here today.